Good morning, and thank you for joining this important conversation, Shifting Power, Money and Meaning in the Indigenous Economy. This session is part of the second annual Rising Economy Week, an immersive event hosted by the South Island Prosperity Partnership. This is just one of more than 20 sessions this week, building momentum for a more resilient, innovative, sustainable, and equitable post-COVID world here in the South Island. My name is Linda Hartford. I'm the Executive Director of CIBC's Indigenous Trust Platform for Canada. I'm joining you today from the unceded territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, whom I thank for their eternal stewardship of this beautiful place where I'm blessed to live, work, and play. CIBC is a proud partner of CIP and delighted to sponsor this session featuring some amazing local Indigenous panelists. CIBC's engagement with CIP and as sponsor of today's session acknowledges our executive level and bank-wide commitment to investing in rebuilding more healthy, resilient communities, to sustainable growth, to leadership in ESG principles and practices, and to true and meaningful reconciliation with Indigenous communities, which includes making a significant investment in building the Indigenous economy. Incorporating Indigenous epistemologies has so much to offer our municipalities, perhaps more so now than ever as we emerge from the pandemic and start to recover from all of the other environmental crises in our communities. Terms we're all now familiar with from the recent COP26 conference: sustainability, stewardship, resilience, capacity building, community and human development have been and continue to be practiced in Indigenous communities worldwide. It is these exact things that will facilitate our reemergence in the South Island as a smarter, stronger, more innovative, and more equitable community-based economy. One that honors the things that truly matter to us all: the air we breathe, the water we drink, the lands we live on, the health and wealth of all of our communities and all of our citizens. And with that, I know I'm delighted to listen and learn more about the growing and thriving Indigenous economy here on the South Island and how it's going to help build our shared rising economy. It's my great pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Susanne Thiessen. Susanne is currently an assistant professor in Indigenous community development in the School of Public Administration here at UVic. Susanne has a doctorate in business administration with a focus in organizational leadership. Her research examines First Nation cultural approaches to work and the relationship of administrative practice and policies to employee engagement for First Nations people. As an Indigenous scholar and researcher, her work privileges Indigenous knowledge in examining and framing research outcomes. We're so delighted to have you moderating today, Susanne. Over to you.
Good morning. What a wonderful opportunity we have this morning to share perspectives and ideas and to acknowledge differences in approach. First, I'd also like to acknowledge the Coast Salish people on whose territory this conference is being broadcast from. And I want to say a big Haichka Siam to the elders and medicine people who are working with the conference to ensure we're all able to come together in a good way. I want to also acknowledge CIBC for their sponsorship and CIP for recognizing the incredible opportunity and responsibility we have to come together and bringing us together, but also thanking all of you for your courage to come and listen to our session this morning and also take some responsibility for changing and transforming the relationships between Indigenous people and settlers. So this morning we're talking about the notion of shifting power, money and meaning in the Indigenous economy. So before we can really come together and plan for economic development opportunities, it's critical that potential economic partners understand how and what Indigenous people are thinking when we talk about economy. In many cases, we assume the meaning is the same. But we need to challenge our assumptions and listen to Indigenous people to fully comprehend our aspirations, our values, and our ways of doing and being together in this economic realm. I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists to you this morning. First of all, we have Chief Gordon Planis, and I think he's out there somewhere. Chief Planis has been the elected chief of the Sauk Nation since 2008. His traditional name is Hayakwacha, named after his great-grandfather from the Chianu Nation, the Salmon people. The chief works closely with the Sauk and other nations towards building a new community vision, one that fosters a healthy Indigenous population with a focus on 4 pillars: autonomy, food security, cultural renaissance, and economic development. I'd like to introduce Christina Clarke. Christina is the CEO of the Songhees Development Corporation for the Songhees Nation. Christina led the implementation of the First Nations Fiscal Management Act for the Songhees Nation, helping to achieve the first FMA laws in Canada and the first debenture bond issue by the First Nations Finance Authority. Joining us is Angela Vandenhout, who is the Director of Economic Development for the Malahat Nation. Angela has been leading collaboration between private and public sectors and Indigenous groups for over 15 years, with over 2 decades working in the natural resource industry while researching and practicing ecological conservation. Angela's focus is on projects which support economic growth while maintaining foundational respect and care for the lands, its resources, and its people. Welcome, Angela. And we have Sage Lacerte. Sage is carrier from the Lake Babine Nation and has served as the founder and CEO of the SAGE initiative since 2019. Between 2018 and 2021, Sage served as the National Youth Ambassador of the Moosehide Campaign, a grassroots movement of Indigenous and non-Indigenous men and boys that works to end violence against women and children in Canada, with a particular focus on post-secondary initiatives. So welcome to this panel. This morning we are going to have a conversation. I'm going to start the conversation with a few questions for our speakers. And then just over the halfway mark, we'll turn to questions from the audience. So you can submit a question at any time through Zoom in the Q&A below your screen. And this session is also being recorded, so you can also submit your question anonymously if you prefer. To interact with the attendees, you can use the Zoom or Whova chat. And the production team, who's feverishly working behind the scenes, will monitor the Whova chat and the Q&A for those joining us through the app. Finally, if you're posting your takeaways from this session through social media, please use the hashtag Rising Economy Week 2021. So good morning, and I'll ask our presenters, our panelists, I'll pose a question to you, and then we'll give you about 2 or 3 minutes each to answer the question, and then we'll proceed to the next. So I will start with Chief Planis. Let's talk about the Indigenous worldview of economic development. When you think of the word prosperity, what comes to mind for you? Is it a state of being? Is it evidenced by physical, spiritual, ceremony, well-being? I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I think when you talk about prosperity, you got to look at the territory as a whole. You got to look at the health of the territory. It actually it'll be an indicator on the health of the community. I think it goes hand in hand. And also, what's your long-term view for your territory in the future? Because if you're looking at enhancements, then you're ensuring that our children will be fine. Mm-hmm. So when you look at prosperity, I'm thinking of it as what is the state of the territory now? What was the state of the territory 100 years ago? And what is the what do you see in the next 100 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years from now? Is what is our territory going to look like? So we really have to dig deep into that kind of discussion. Thank you, Haishka.
Beautiful. So it's really what really resonates with me is the 7 generations forward view, how important that is, and in planning for our children and our children's children's. Thank you. Christina Clarke.
Oh, for Songhees Nation, economic development is one of 6 priorities that are considered really of equal importance, and those are self-government, health, education, land and housing, language and culture, and economic development. And listing those, you see, this is really a holistic view of what it means to be healthy as a person, as a community, as a country, and nature and its health too. None of those things can be healthy unless the whole is healthy. You can't poison a river and then drink the water from the lake. So that holistic approach is key to everything that we're doing. And I think also too for Songhees Nation, when we established our values, we did this for the whole nation, and then we applied that with an economic lens to see how well it fits for our development corporation. The value statement is, Ait Squalwin, with one heart and one mind, we commit to help one another, to forgive one another, and to love one another with respect, honesty, and courage. And looking at those, see that they're all relational, how we work together. So in business dealings, we are respectful, honest, and courageous. We choose partners who share our values. We build trust and establish long-term relationships. We resolve concerns directly and assume the best intentions of one another. So that's the value system that we're bringing to the work. And then I echo Chief Planas that the land is central to the economy, and the health of the land, it speaks to the health of the economy. You can't separate one from the other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. Over to you, Angela Vanden Hout.
Thank you. Good morning. Prosperity really is, about every member of the community having everything they need. It's not necessarily the same thing across the board, but it's about every individual and all families and all members of the community having everything they need. Economic development is the financial engine that helps to resource those needs in any community. However, it can't be done at the expense of the environment, the lands, and the people. So we're all saying the same message here. Really, it's about the economic development and prosperity really is multi-layered, and it's more than just the financial component.
Really, I really like that statement. Prosperity means everyone is taken care of, and economic development is the financial driver. That's well stated. Yes, thank you. Then Sage Lacerte.
I think about wealth often. I try to define wealth and prosperity every time that I have these conversations, and it makes me think about the well-being of our people, the well-being of the relationships we have with our human and non-human relatives, with Mother Earth, and really just thinking about how the Indigenous economy acts as a platform for Indigenous well-being. And it's inherently spiritual. I think the nature of relating to Mother Earth and to each other is inherently spiritual, and it's social. And we have to always breathe life into it and make sure that we're nourishing those relationships. And the prosperity piece really comes from when those relationships are nourished, then we're able to do our harvest, then we're able to be well in our bodies and in our minds. And then the spiritual aspect is the cosmos, is our ancestors, and really being able to tie those all together and make sure that we don't forget about the ceremonial and the spiritual aspect of the work that we do, because there's so much love and beauty and grace in a lot of our work, and it's so inherently tied to the earth. So I really appreciate the Chief for mentioning that and just calling on how beautiful our territories are, and just setting our gaze on those landscapes and really connecting ourselves to the earth feels very important. And to just call ceremony into the space as an inherent piece of economic prosperity.
Thank you. I love that. The idea of nourishing relationships might be very new to a non-Indigenous view on economic development, and I think that's really, really beautiful. So thank you for that. So my next question, you're going to be encouraged to draw on your experience from working in your communities. Chief Planus, what are some of the obstacles you face in recognizing this state of being for community?
Well, I think outreach and education to the people that live within our territory and surrounding area for formal recognition is so important. A lot of people don't understand what happened in the last 150 years, the signing of the Douglas Treaty in 1850s, all of the things that happened since that time to today. And, you know, we're at the day and age of looking at real reconciliation. And, you know, you have to look at that in our lens, in the First Nations lens. And that takes time to understand. And also all of the things that happened and transpired over this time of 100+ years is think about signing an agreement together to co-manage the territory, and then become powerless and put you on small pockets of land and not being able to go out into the environment where our people are supposed to be. So actually now we've come to a juncture in the road where we're coming back to that full circle where we have the ability to walk the footsteps of our ancestors. And with it, we still have a lot of work to do in educating the general public on our old way of life and what are we going to need to sustain that old way of life. And that is we need those sacred places, we need land, we need to have those villages that were wrongfully taken from us. We need those places for cultural health. We need something that we can always ensure that our children will be able to connect to. And without that, how can we be Sao people? So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Haishka.
Haishka, thank you. I'm going to circle back to this question once the other panelists have had a chance to answer. Christina, Clarke.
When we ask Songhees members to express in 1 or 2 words who they are, what should people know about them? And the dominant word was land. The people do not conceive of themselves as separate from land. So lack of access to land, lack of control over land, lack of the ability to leverage land if it's reserve land, all of those things are tremendously damaging to an economy. And the second thing to consider is that we're coming from, we're not trying to rebuild an economy from sort of day one. We're in a deficit trying to rebuild an economy, trying to shift from a system that encourages dependency on limited transfer payments that create poverty, and shifting with really really was an internal strength that comes up through the communities to shift the thinking within themselves to approach the same circumstances differently and create something different. I've witnessed that with Songhees Nation it's like turning a great big ship, and you've got to slow it right down and just change the way things are done and the way things are thought about. And it's a tremendous challenge. One of the obstacles too is that other folks measure success differently and then apply that lens to the work that we're doing. An example that would be measuring a business case based on the amount of profit that it produces, rather than on how many people it employs or whether the work of that organization contributes to the well-being of everyone. So shifting in how we look at things from a profit and unlimited growth perspective, more to a holistic approach, would really help. It's hard to have that approach in a greater system that doesn't have that approach. Then we'd really all be better off on the planet if everybody had that approach. So we need more folks to appreciate the integrated nature of all that is and start functioning together.
Beautiful. Yes, thank you so much. Really, I think it's much easier to think and practice in a linear fashion, and it really requires people to expand their minds and think in ways that they're not used to thinking if they're going to understand holistic approaches. So yeah, thank you for that. Let's ask Angela Vandenhout the same question.
I think the biggest barrier is so complex. It really comes back to colonization and the multi-generational effects of the residential school system. We've created a society within Indigenous communities where they are, in many cases, so dependent on the government that made them the way that they are. And therefore, there's a large struggle to advance in economic development when you rely, for example, on the rules of a grant that the government is putting out, and that's really the only way that you can finance it. Well, then suddenly you're on the government's timeline, right? So it's about how do we approach business with non-Indigenous groups where they've got that independence, they've got the financial backing, they've got a history of financial success, and marry it with non-Indigenous business to be able to then learn the way of non-Indigenous business, which is respecting the lands and its people first. And it's not about, I mean, you look at the world around us, we need this so badly right now. We've tried the colonization, right? Look at our world, that's not working, right? It's time to speak to Indigenous groups.
Yeah, thank you. I like the, yes, we've tried the colonization. I think we've had enough. Thank you. Sage Lacerte.
Yeah, I just want to echo my aunties here, if I can call you that. It's really something that I've seen so much since I've kind of just joined this space. And there's a obvious difference in worldview between Indigenous worldview and Western worldview about what that prosperity looks like and what relationships may look like. We've seen, as a result of imperialism and colonization, that accumulation of wealth and oneness and kind of thinking of oneself before the community, and also extractivism is something that is a benchmark in Western worldview around wealth creation. And we've seen so many Indigenous organizations and initiatives come forward that have chosen to radically change those beliefs and use an Indigenous worldview in the relationships that I spoke about, in the way that you assert governance, through our boards and through the way that we relate to each other. And I think that there's a huge opportunity here that is only going to become louder to take on some of those practices and maybe learn a little bit more about what we can do to adopt some practices that are closer to Indigenous worldview, which wealth is defined by how much you can share and how rich your community is. How many babies you have running around and if they're laughing. And it's all just so important to have. If your babies come to work with you, like that's the most important thing, is intergenerational wealth and knowledge transfer. So just being able to incorporate some of those practices, I see as one of the biggest obstacles at this time, but it's also my lived experience. Like, I'm that laughing baby that got to grow up with my parents, and now I get to talk to all of you. So I see that there's a pivot, that we can be really hopeful and resilient and strong in that pivot.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sage. So the fact that you as panelists are all here today, taking time away from the many hats you're already wearing, giving of yourself to help build relationships and help educate and help settlers understand worldviews, says so much about your willingness to and desire to build reconciliation. But let's put it back on non-Indigenous people and say, and I'll ask you, how can non-Indigenous people, organizations, businesses support Indigenous nations and people in recognizing prosperity as defined by us, as defined by Sage, Christina, Angela, and Chief Plainess, or you? We'll start with Chief Plainess.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say is that if we look at our surroundings where we live today, what is the state of the territory? How are the ungulates? You know, the plant health within our territory. What first growth do we have left? How are the state of the watersheds? You know, water security for all of us is going to be key in the future. And also, you know, we all got to think about this is we breathe really fresh air. We have all that in common, that we all breathe the same air. You live in our territory, the water comes from Souk Lake. It comes from our territory, and we drink good water. And to consider that is people that come to our territory need to understand the health of the territory and how can we enhance it for the next 100 years. What would that mean to all of us living here? What, you know, that means environmental investment. That could change an economy. Are we willing to do that? Are we willing to sacrifice? And if we do, what comes out of that sacrifice? So we need to look at what the future is going to be in regards to ensuring a healthy life for future generations. And I think it is going to come with a few hard questions all of us are going to have to answer in the next few years. And that's going to be the hard part. So thank you, Lacerte.
Great point in terms of willing to sacrifice. When I think about what our nations have sacrificed so far, and the fact that we have been resilient, our nations are still here. So, you know, we're used to making these decisions that put community first. And so inviting others in to have those hard conversations and develop that perspective will be key. Absolutely. Thank you, Chief Plainess. Let's go to Angela van den Hout.
I think that it comes down to understanding that there's not a one-size-fits-all way to incorporate with any Indigenous group. As a non-Indigenous group or potential partner, walk in the door. Meet the leaders, the leadership. Just walk in the door. You don't even necessarily need an appointment. In my experience, I've just walked in the door many times and been directed to Chief's office. So it's about building that genuine relationship. And then once that trust can be gained over a matter of time, it's, you know, it would be an honor then to learn some traditional knowledge about that nation, to learn the specific needs of that nation. And then only from there can you really do business in a good way. You're really there for the right reasons. If you're just coming to do business for tax incentives, you're missing the point. So it needs to be about doing good work and doing great work together and taking a stand against what's happened historically to Indigenous people and being part of that solution. That's really what reconciliation means to me. And that's what we need at Malahat.
Beautiful. Thank you. So building relationships comes first, learning about the people, and having the courage to champion reconciliation. Absolutely. Thank you. Christina Clarke.
Looks like I've raised my hand somehow. Don't know how I did that. Oh, there we go, lower my hand. I'm so eager to speak. The first thing I want to say is let them bring the babies to work. Because I think that actually speaks to a corner of this. When we're talking about economic development, we're talking about employment and engaging more Indigenous people in the workforce. One of the barriers there has been that the corporate environment is hostile to families. And this has affected women forever. And it really affects Indigenous people, because you come into that environment and it doesn't respect that you have a family at home that you're responsible for, or that you have cultural responsibilities, or that you have a life outside of work. So as employers, especially now when we've got such a labor shortage, now's a good time to become a better employer and think about your staff as human beings that are part of the organism that is your corporation. And the health of those individual people are directly related to the health of the organization. You can't chew them up and spit them out and expect your organization to thrive. So that's a big part of it. And bringing babies to work is an excellent example of what that means. And as Sage was sharing that, I was thinking back to being the executive director for Songhees Nation and how many babies would come in the office and how wonderful it was. And it didn't slow down productivity either. People were happy. They're passing the babies around, and it's lovely. And I encourage all workplaces to consider that type of thing. And others have said that learning, that, truth before reconciliation. People need to learn the truth, and the entire onus for that learning should not be, people should not transfer that to Indigenous people. The labor involved in that work, and there are people who are making it their life's work to do that labor, but it's a lot to ask of people to continually try to fill that knowledge gap. There's a lot of information out there. There are a lot of amazing Indigenous authors, amazing books that can be read and movies that can be seen. So people should go on a journey of discovery of what's already been out there before kind of calling the local First Nations saying, we want to reconcile, and putting it on them to figure out how that's going to work. Putting your money where your mouth is. So a lot of industry, they have Indigenous engagement officers, and they go into communities trying to engage. Well, we don't have Indigenous engagement officer, industry engagement officers to meet them. So they're pulling somebody away from their work. And that is pulling on the capacity, already limited capacity of the nation for all the work that they have to do. So I think industry should kick in money to support the growth of a new type of career in First Nations offices, and that is being that person that can meet with industry and be a conduit for trying to work with the nation, because it's too much to ask. Our executive director called me up during the summertime and just said, I need your help getting them to stop. There's efforts to engage to the point where it was painful. And I was sort of saying, can you lay off the nation a little bit right now to some of our partners? So yeah, that's those are my comments. Thank you. Oh, one more thing just to say is, once you've paid attention and you see what's happening in the nations and you know what's going on in your area, then you start to see where your talents and your resources can help. And once you know somebody, it's much easier to help them. So that's the first step when you're looking to support the work that's being done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. You make a good point about, not having the capacity in community to answer so many questions and respond to so many inquiries, and the fact that if we don't in community, we're then seen as not willing or not wanting to engage, and what's wrong with us because we won't come to the table. But that's so not true. So I love your point about helping us to build the capacity to create an opportunity to even have the conversation in the first place is beautiful. And about the learning, really take the opportunity to understand the true history as told by Indigenous people about Canada's relationship with us. So very good points, thank you. And Sage, Lacerte, I'm going to turn the question over to you now.
When we consider what non-Indigenous people or organizations, institutions can do to recognize Indigenous prosperity, I think it's important there's kind of two avenues. One is a bit more profound, I would say, in the sense that there's a radical need for a change in mindset around what the relationship is between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. It's not that Indigenous people are coming from a scarcity, we need this from you. I think it's more so about that relationship building and coming to each other as people and really recognizing that. There's also, I think, something that's really profound about that is that folks have to ask themselves what their practices of racism are every day. Things that people do that are show microaggressions, that show racist attitudes, and to really question that within yourself, and to bring that practice to your family dinner table, to say, what are the products that we buy? How do we use our dollar? What are the words that we say and use and try to promote in our community and within our family? And who are the people that we see every day? And kind of asking the same question to them and being willing to do that all the time. Maybe it's uncomfortable. I'm sorry that if that's uncomfortable to you, but it's something that you should already be doing. And then the other route is like Canadian government is not an Indigenous institution, it's a non-Indigenous institution. And I would highly, highly, highly recommend that our governments and our governance take a look at Indigenous models of reconciliation, like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Why did Canada take so long to jump onto the UN drip train? I'd love to know. I'd love to ask our Prime Minister and all of our friends who are MPs and MLAs to radically consider what it would look like to adopt some of the articles of the UN drip, and to make that something that's a reality in our society, and to make those impressions not only by law, but also socially in our society, to ensure that Indigenous people's rights are honored and respected and reflected in our practices.
Beautiful, thank you. And I think you make a really important point about looking at it from a rights-based lens, because we do have rights that are recognized internationally, and the trickle down to what is actually acknowledged and implemented nationally, provincially, and then locally there's a huge gap. So thank you very much. So now it's 10:38. We've got time to shift and receive some questions from our virtual audience. I have one question in the Q&A in the chat, which I'm going to read to the panel, and then perhaps you can, panelists, you can jump in if you have the answer. So my first question is from Owen Callan. Question for Angela and others on the panel. Can you expand on some of the principles and approaches to building strategic partnerships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities for community and economic development? Can you also talk about any, which I think you've done a little bit, can you also talk about any examples or models or structures that you would suggest looking to for communities seeking to learn about best practices, wise practices?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I tend to sound like a broken record here, but I have to start with the basic fact that this starts by asking questions. I acknowledge that Christina mentioned she's inundated sometimes with attempts to engage. We also receive a ton of messages and invitations. However, they're to speak at us. They've already figured it out in their boardroom, and now they want to tell us how we're going to do business together and ask if we want to join in the model that they've created in their boardroom. I don't consider that a contact. I consider a true, attempt at engagement when you actually just introduce yourself. Sure, tell me what you do, and then ask me what we do. Ask me what our priorities are. Tell me that you've gone online and read our very public comprehensive community plan. Tell me you've read our strategic plan. Regurgitate something to me that you know about us because you looked us up on Wikipedia. I have never had that happen in my career, ever. That is very telling. So learn a little bit about the background and then come in the door or write that email and let me know that you're actually interested in doing business with us and you're interested in learning about us to see if maybe there's some value add on both sides, that we can have a mutually beneficial relationship. That's a very strong first step. I honestly think it's so simple that if we would just do this, it would solve an awful lot of the issues that we're seeing today. And, you know, it would take away sort of this middleman approach that's being done right now, where people are hiring consultants to sit in their boardrooms and decide to tell you how they should best engage with Indigenous communities. Do the work yourself. You would do it in any other aspect of your life. If you wanted to go on a date with a woman, you would do your background, or a man, you would do your background. Where do they work? What do they do? What are their interests? And then you would go on that date prepared. It's the same thing.
That's great, Angela. Thank you so much. And I like to think of it in terms of, asking me to cooperate as opposed to asking me to collaborate. If you want me to cooperate, you come to the table with an idea of the way things are going to go, and I may not or may not buy in. But if you really want to collaborate with me, you come to the table with nothing, and there's a big blank piece of paper in the middle, and we both contribute to it. So it's a very different mindset. I appreciate that comment. Do others have comments on that question? Okay, let's move to the next. Oh, okay.
Oh, I have a comment. I just want to mention this is we have a group that meet in our territory here. It's a reconciliation group. And I've spoken at one of these groups a couple of times actually. And we had gatherings at our church. It used to be a Catholic church, and it's been transferred over to our people. It's situated right above the hill on Lacerte Road going down into the village along Big River. But in regards to the reconciliation group, they ask questions. They want to learn about the territory. They want to learn about who we are, how big the territory is, what the watersheds are like, what is the health of the all of the plants, the ungulates, all of the four-leggeds, our dependency on not just the ocean environment, but the terrestrial and how it's all connected. And then how do we reverse the trend of resource extraction to enhancement? So all those discussions are important. And again, when I talk about this very thing, I always think about formal recognition because, we can talk about it. We can acknowledge First Nations and their territories. But if you want to acknowledge us, we need to have those sacred places back to our people. Without that, we don't have cultural health. And that's a message that resonates, I believe, through all the nations up and down the coast and across this country. And I think that is something that will actually have a profound effect on Canada. We can heal Canada. Just give us a chance and we'll do it. So thank you, Heishka.
Heishka, thank you so much. So that's a really good intro into the next question. I'll read it aloud to the panelists. Given that land and relationships are critical to prosperity, and given that the majority of land in the South Island is privatized with residents holding about 100 billion in real estate value, increasing every year, how do we support non-Indigenous residents to learn, share wealth that supports community capacity, and become part of a solution through land and relationships? I think Chief Planis began to touch on that.
That's a good one. I love it. Can I start off?
Please.
If we look at doing research in British Columbia and look at doing research across Canada, there's over 200 tribes in British Columbia, total of over 600 in the whole of Canada. All you have to do is look at certain nations within British Columbia right now that have 30, 40, 50, 60, 70,000 acres of land. And that's reserve land. We in the South have 165 acres. Now, that's a little different than 30,000 acres. So why is that? And to note, we are one of a few that signed the first treaties in British Columbia. And that treaty should have been honored through Douglas Treaty, that they protect those sacred sites, those village sites, those playing areas, the hunting sites, the gathering sites, all of those places that made us who we are. Those places are gone. They were given away on private interest, and a lot of people have to go back and look at Dunsmuir, where they gave Dunsmuir a big part of Vancouver Island. And to this day, that has an opportunity to be corrected. And it hasn't. So we have work to do. Now, just think about that. We really got to sit back and think about that. We've been saying these same words about our territory for very many years now. And we know that we would like to see our territories come back the way they used to. That way we can walk the footsteps of our ancestors. And for us to do that, we need our territory to heal. And healing takes time. So I think there is a lot of discussion we need to have in the next while about how we're going to do that. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Heishka.
CM. Honoring treaties is an important step in this process. 100%. Would any of the other panelists like to weigh in on this question?
I'll only just offer one small thing, and it's that our modern economy is built on stolen land and slave labor, and the notion that we would support folks in doing their homework and learning about how to create space for Indigenous people on that stolen land is an interesting frame question. And I would encourage folks to just consider, at an individual level within their community, what they do to create spaces and places for Indigenous ways of knowing and doing, and cultural spaces, and to consider what culture and what use of the land that you're making currently, and to consider if that's important to you. Like, is the 100 golf courses that we have on Southern Vancouver Island super important? I'm not sure. Could we maybe repurpose that? Absolutely. So to just make some of those considerations and to really put a name to exactly what we're talking about, which is an economy that was built on stolen land and slave labor in Canada and across Turtle Island.
Thank you, Sage. I think your point is resonates with everyone in the panel, and I think it's also a point that is that we hear growing from Indigenous youth as we move through this. You know, the frustration and looking at what has been taken and wanting so desperately to rebuild and have our spiritual and cultural health back. So thank you so much. Christina, were you going to add to that?
I was just going to say that if a family has land to donate, consider the First Nation whose territory it is. I've witnessed Songhees members dismay when there's newspaper articles about this land or that land given to this organization or that organization, and they're saying, what about us? It's our land you're giving away. So consider that. If you want to bequeath land, bequeath it to the First Nation whose land it is.
Yeah, it's really it is a difficult question, but I think we're good at that. I mean, as societies and communities, we also have the opportunity to really do something different in the South Island, and to I think that the purpose of CIP is again to transform and create opportunity at these tables to have these meaningful and difficult, courageous discussions. So our time for questions, I can maybe ask if the audience, if there is one more question, because we have probably a minute or so. And if not, I want to really say Haichka Siem in my language, Hout, to all of the panelists today for sharing your time. It is, just strikes me that you were able to take this time from your jobs and to come and share with the CIP participants your incredible worldview and your experiences. So Hout for that. I'm going to turn it back to our operator.
Thank you, Susanne, and thank you to all our panelists for joining us today and sharing your wisdom with us. We want to also thank CIBC for sponsoring this important conversation, And thank you to our presenting sponsor, RBC, and our innovation sponsor, BC Ferries, for supporting Rising Economy Week. We encourage you to head back to the Hoover platform to continue the conversation, where you can check out the event agenda and upcoming sessions, and then head to the community section to check out the exhibitor booths and join the virtual meetups. We hope you enjoy the rest of Rising Economy Week. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. Aishka.
Let's see.